I need all the help I can get. We're going to talk on intimacy today, and hopefully we'll make some inroads on that most troublesome topic in our times, the crises of intimacy so many people have. One that didn't bother people as much as it does us in the past. It bothered people less. As those of you who are aware of my procedures know, I disrobe as I talk. When we get on to sexual intimacy, I may divest myself. Well, I mean, yes. I mean, you'd have to, wouldn't you? Once upon a time, people, even in marriages, were so busily involved in maintenance and survival chores that they didn't worry too much about the quality of their relationships and marital intimacy. The reason for that was that the contractual notion of marriage was heavily stressed. By contractual notion, I mean that there was a quid pro quo. You're going to do this and I'm going to do that, and that's how we survive. It was a very practical arrangement. You know, a farmer needed a wife. He had to have one of those gadgets in order to get the preserves put up for winter and the socks darned and children born who would be economic assets at age 6 when they could toddle out and feed the chickens and things like that. And a woman needed a good provider, capital G, capital P. If she didn't find one of those, she could starve to death because there weren't any jobs for women. And there was a great deal of stress put on the relationship as one for maintenance and survival. And because a woman who didn't find a husband had to be a maiden-aunt living in a married relative's home, putting up preserves for winter, darning socks, and helping tend to kids and so on. You see, do those things. So great-great-grandfather may have had a relationship with great-great-grandmother, but he very seldom hunkered down over the dinner table and said to her, honey, we're not rapping on the same wavelengths these days. And I don't feel sexually fulfilled. Things like that. He didn't do that. He was too danged pooped out at the end of a 16-hour day to worry about things like that. And as long as there were potatoes in the cellar, everybody was, and the roof on the house didn't leak, everybody was pretty happy with the arrangement. Today, however, when we stress the relational aspects of matrimony particularly, although our comments are for everybody in intimate relationships, single people, celibates, young people, old people, you name it, not just married couples, but I'm using that as our paradigm for the moment. We stress the relational aspects of things, and we place a heavier emphasis now upon being known and getting to know other people. And so I'd like to begin at the beginning, at about the time we were born. And all of us at the time we're born begin in the task of almost immediate bonding with mother and with father, most particularly with mother. And a lot depends on what occurs. Those of you who are acquainted with my visual aids know they're all circles. When we get to intercourse, it'll be a circle. But this happens to be the pie of the human personality, if you will. And much will depend upon how mom and dad related to us from the earliest moments of our entering this world as to how we respond to the world at large. And all of us are born with a need to love and be loved. Okay? That's a basic human need. That's not a want. That's a need. If you don't get it met, you will die of love starvation or whatever. But a lot will depend on our early experiences as to whether or not we have a larger or smaller amount of fear of abandonment and or fear of invasion. And all of us have these various components. Just depends on our early experiences how high or how large each slice of that pie is, okay? For example, if when you were a tiny baby, your parents invaded you, or as you were growing up, you felt suffocated, or mommy came over and said, smile for grandma, darn it, smile for grandma. Well, a baby that gets that done to it has been invaded and will promptly, and withdraw and try to drown itself in the mattress or whatever. And on the other hand, a youngster who has not been treated with any great deal of tender, loving care will fear abandonment. So one fears invasion, one fears abandonment. And to some degree, the only thing, by the way, that drives out fear is love. You all know that. But, and as we go on, I think it'll become clear that basic to all intimacy is our healthy love of ourselves. Now, these things function to create us as we're responding, and in previous film series and tapes, I've talked about this a lot, and I'm not going to repeat it all here, but our response to life is what matters. Our response to what's going on is what matters. That's why no two people on the face of the earth are alike, because as we, after we're born and we start relating to the world around us and to the people around us, we respond out of our own unique, never to be duplicated, absolutely irreplaceable personalities. Okay? And it's in that response that we're busily creating ourselves. So some people who are raised in a horrendous environment can come out pretty well. They achieve well, they have high self-esteem, they've got good survival skills, very often because in that early process, at least the horrendousness was consistent. It wasn't chaotic. So you learned the rules, and you learned how to survive with the consistent, whatever it was, cruelty, mental abuse, emotional abuse. You learned, you know, how to deal with the sickies. But some people who come from even less horrendous situations, because there's a lack of consistency in that, they're very confused about how to relate to the world around them. But all of us, if we're trying to get our need to love and be loved met, have need to be aware of how much we fear abandonment and how much we fear invasion. Now let me describe some of these people who fear abandonment or who fear invasion. I referred to the once in a workshop for men only. Let me start with that. In Orange County, I was giving a workshop for men only. And these were divorced, separated, and widowed men. And I walked into an amphitheater, somewhat like this one, only it had blackboards. It was a college amphitheater. And I said, I've done a book on males. I would prefer not to spend our workshop time telling you what I already know. I would prefer you to tell me what it is you want to hear. And the very first question came from a very handsome, blonde, blue-eyed, handsome guy, handsome fellow who said, "What's intimate? How do you be intimate? My wife left me because I wouldn't be intimate, and God knows I tried to be intimate." See? And the very next question was another fellow, not quite as handsome as the first one, but a presentable enough fellow, who promptly said, "Yeah, everybody tells us to be intimate, nobody tells you how." See? The next guy was a fellow whose wife had left him during menopause, left him and the 6 children because she ran off with another woman. But that's another story. Some lacking of intimacy there. And so let's discuss that a little bit. The person who fears invasion in later life becomes what I call the lone cowboy, or the good soldier, or whatever. That's the person, and you might want to check yourself out to see how often you fit one of these categories. The person who says, well, I don't need anybody. You know, well, I have friends, but I don't correspond with them. We know we're there. Well, yeah, well, you know, I like sex as much as the next person, but I was married once for a short while, but now I have Ethel, and Ethel comes by on Friday. She stays too long on Sunday, though. I mean, she keeps interfering with the game and wanting to cuddle and things like that. I'd be happy if she went home Sunday morning early, you know, before breakfast. But I'm okay. I don't need a lot of that mushy stuff, you know. One of the things that they worry about, you see, is, especially say if it was their mother, we're talking about a man for the moment, if their mother who invaded them in one way or another tried to suffocate them, they're afraid if they give themselves away intimately, get too close to somebody, they'll lose their personhood. They'll be invaded. This other powerful woman will take over in their lives. So the moment it gets too close, they back out. They run away from intimacy, and they try to control it very rigidly. That's why I refer to them as a soldier. They go around like this. We sometimes call them uptight. A technical term therapists use for anal retentives. On the other hand, the person who fears abandonment is one who may have even lost a parent as a child, or through divorce or death, or who may have been abused in one way or another, and the need to be loved is so profound, they're fearful of losing anybody who enters their life, and you say hello to a person like that, and they go, "You're mine!" You know, and they grab immediately and they hold on for dear life, and they will stay in the most unhealthy relationships for fear you're going to leave them. And they will enter the most unhealthy relationships because anybody who gets close to them, they try to grab onto for real intimacy, you see, when they get close. And the other, when one of these meets one of these, you ought to see what happens. You know, he says hello, and she goes, "You're mine," and he goes, "Whoom," right out the window, you know, to get away, because that's exactly what he's afraid of. At any rate, that person who fears abandonment, and that can carry on as long as you're aware of it. My daughter Jennifer was 14 when her mother died suddenly, and Jennifer was in Mexico, and she came home from Mexico to say goodbye to her mother, who was in a coma, and after she left the room, she hyperventilated, and we put her in another bedroom in the hospital, another room in the hospital, and as soon as we got her breathing under control, she reached up, grabbed me by the shoulders, pulled me nose to nose with her, and said, "Don't you die on me. You die on me and I'll kill you." Now, what she was experiencing there was a very common situation, which is the loss of one parent. She now dreaded the loss of another. And now she's a very competent, professional young woman, and yet when I was on a trip to Australia last year, I came home. I make a tour there every year or so. I'm probably better known in Australia than I am in the United States. It's called the further famouser law. The further away you get from home, the famouser you are. At any rate, I was gone for about a month, and when I came home, there were 4 messages on my answering machine, and they were all from Jennifer that very day. "Are you home yet, Dad? Call me when you get home. Dad, are you home yet? You home? Have you called? Are you going to call me?" So I called her. She said, "I'll be right over." I said, "What's up?" She said, "I'll be right over." And she hung up, and she left her office, and she came charging across town, and she charged into the house. She threw herself in my arms, gave me a big hug, which is a wonderful thing because she's a beautiful young woman. Big hug, and she says, "You stayed away 4 days too long. Don't you remember I have an abandonment complex?" And she's well aware of it, so she knows when it's kicking in, you know. And it began 4 days before, that Daddy might not be coming back. He's staying away too long, you see. More recently, Jennifer has decided to go travel in Europe. And about a month ago, she phoned me and said she was coming by for a visit. All my kids, by the way, for those who are interested, are out of the home these days. All 8 of them. Somebody the other day in New York said, 8? I said I had 8, so I call it breeding your own friends. I wanted at least 6 pallbearers. It was really interesting when the last one left, when Christopher left. In the following weeks, I began to get numerous invitations to come down to the office for lunch with one or another of them and meet the people, or how would you like to go out to dinner with us? The married ones would say that. Or how about going to a movie on Sunday? These were unprecedented in their number, these invitations. And I was on a program in Australia shortly thereafter, and on the plane going over, I had 15 hours to think about this, among other things. And I got onto Don Lane's show, Late Night Oz, which is kind of a Dave Letterman program, funky. And Don asked what was new, and I told him about this unprecedented deluge of invitations, and I said, "You know what those kids are doing? Christopher, now having left, they think that I am wandering around the house, this 4-story Victorian, going from room to room, sighing, and missing them. When in reality, I've been going from room to room, exulting and saying, 'Free at last, and it's all mine. No interruptions, no loud noises,' you know, wonderful." Anyway, Jennifer phoned and said she wanted to come by. They wanted to be sure I was home. She came by and she said, "Dad, I'm planning this trip, 5 weeks in Europe tour, and then I'm going to spend a month in one of those locations." And she said, "And I began last week to get scared." And she said, and so I did what I knew you'd tell me to do. I asked myself, how are you scaring yourself, Jennifer? And then I decided how I'm doing it. And you know what it is, Dad? The last time I left the country, I was in Mexico, and Mom died. And I realized that I'm getting afraid of going on this trip for fear you will die. Back to fear of abandonment, you see. She said, so I have come by to insist that you assure me you will not die while I am on this trip. And I said, well, I'll do my best. And she said, just for you, I said, I'll do my best, you know. And she said, and I'm going to get all of the other kids to agree not to change while I am gone. See, what that comes from, and she's very well aware of it, is her fear of abandonment. I think it's really critical if you understand those things, then you can manage them with the sort of humor and understanding, self-understanding that she has, and then they don't become those unconscious drives that cause people to enter into or hold on to unhealthy relationships or seek instant intimacy. As many people who fear abandonment, you know, they seek this instant intimacy thing. Okay, having made that remark, by the way, one of the aspects of cultism is you'll find most people in cults, young people in cults, middle-aged people who join cults, people who become fanatics about certain groups or make support groups their religion and so on, are very often people who fear abandonment. They have to have these other people around them. They work out of a compulsion to belong to somebody, belong to something, and to be in there. Okay, I just wanted to make that. And some people who are, in a sense, promiscuous are people who, in their fear of abandonment, grab onto a partner, then the partner feels smothered because they demand so much. There's never enough. That's their slogan, never enough, you know, never enough. More, you know, gotta have more. You're not close enough. You see, because they're trying to fill a huge empty space from their childhood. Well, of course, what that does is it eventually drives the intimate away, and then they have to have another one right away to fill the empty space. So I've had people who have had numerous relationships, and they come in to find out why they picked the wrong men or why they picked the wrong women, when in reality they're not picking the wrong people at all. None of you is the wrong person. Okay? They are operating out of an unconscious fear, usually for them, an unconscious fear of abandonment, and grabbing onto people to fill their needs rather than trying to see who the people are. We'll come back to that matter of meeting the other where the other's at in a moment. Okay. So a lot depends on how big of the slice of the pie there of those three aspects of our being, which one's the biggest as to how we're functioning. And for some of us, those are smaller, much smaller slices. Okay. Now, what is intimacy, after all? You know, when I was a paper boy, when I first learned to read, I learned to read from the newspapers. One morning, I was reading the newspaper. But always, every time I saw a newspaper, I tried to read it. One day, I found I could. And then I began to discover that Earl Flynn was being intimate with somebody. Yeah, that tells you how old I am. Charlie Chaplin was accused of being intimate with somebody. And that was interesting. And some people admitted being intimate with somebody else. And these were usually paternity suits or statutory rape things. Being intimate with was a euphemism, I now know, for having had, quote, sexual relations with somebody, but they didn't want to use the word sex because that would terrify everybody. So the times have changed. And in point of fact, if you look it up in your ancient Webster's, the one with the India paper that's about this thick, you'll find the fourth or fifth definition of intimacy is illicit sexual relationships. Isn't that interesting? Illicit sexual relations are called being intimate. What happened to licit ones? You know, what happened to the good ones? Aren't they intimate? But at any rate, intimate really means innermost, the innermost part of our being. And it comes from the word intimus, which means innermost, and it also means the deepest part of our being. And many clients come to me and they wonder if intimacy is possible. They talk in terms of the broken relationships they've had. They talk in terms of their essential feelings of loneliness and not being at home in the world or at home with anybody else. And the reason I bring this up is, you see, intimacy does not necessarily involve sexual relationship. It does not necessarily involve that we know one another over a long period of time even. It really involves, as you'll see as we go along today, paying attention to another human being. So I want to tell you a little story about intimacy on that level and then move back to discussing some of the barriers we raise to intimacy. I was in a town in another part of the country years ago, and they had a reception for me. One of the perks of being me is people will throw you a party, and sometimes. And the family that in whose home this reception was held had a daughter who had just returned from school and all. And when I first met her, I was filled with dread. She was a very beautiful young woman, and yet my intuition told me her presence in front of me when she greeted me filled me with dread. And I knew that she was in a very bad way, and if she had not attempted suicide, she was going to. And I really felt the need to talk to her privately, but it would be a little difficult since there were about 50 people in this gathering, and they were all arriving, and I was the guest of honor, so to speak. And how do you tell all of these people when you are a married man, 43 or 44 years old at the time? A long time ago. How do you say, I'm going to take this nice, sweet young thing off to the corner over here and talk with her privately for an hour or two? You don't. So really, even by the time the evening was over, even though she went all through the motions of being part hostess for this group with her mother, I didn't have that opportunity to talk to her. Well, as it turned out, her mother was very shrewd, and though I was staying in another home, the mother invited me to brunch the next morning and then absented herself. And there was a whole hockey team coming in and out of that house. Her brothers and other people were coming in and out of the house, and we sat down over the breakfast table, and I looked at her and I said, "Why on earth would you want to kill yourself?" And she proceeded to tell me. And we talked for about a half an hour or more, and then she drove me to the airport, and we got to talk on the way to the airport, and then I came home, and this is the letter she wrote me, which I share with you because it says so much about intimacy. Reflecting today on things said, I am realizing that I have never really had a dialogue with a man before. Either I have been put down, hustled, or been the audience for some man's ego, etc., etc. Always he had a motive in listening to me, a selfish one. And when male friends tried to get through to me, I had so many defenses built up, I never knew that I wasn't communicating either. Such a loss. We have all been cheated. Never has a mature man made me feel that what I had to say was important or had some insight. I was always, not always, but with men who have shared a major part of my life, a target for distorted egos. Either that or wooing. Everyone's in the race, right? And I did it back to them. You gave me a beautiful gift. My life is different already. How did you know? How could you be aware of what was happening to me? Who would think that conversation over eggs could give me what has eluded me all these years? All that hopping, bed and bar and otherwise, all that grinding my way to orgasms did not show me what intimacy could be. I experienced that in a kitchen with people running in and out and shouting over our heads during our breakfast conversation. I continue amazed and exhilarated by that discovery. I feel like laughing and crying because a path of pleasure, of joy, and of growth awaits me now, and I am already walking on it. Now, there are a lot of elements in that letter. That's why I read it at the outset. A lot of elements. One is that intimacy really became a factor of what? The basis of it was what? Somebody paid attention. That's all. Anybody in this room could have done it. Paying attention. Item two, she had been searching for it, but was playing games. And we'll come talking about games, you see. Told you, that's my best visual aid there. and we're going to talk about that. And even the sex games, you see, hopping from bed to bed and so on, and what happens is, she's talking about having searched for something, she didn't even know what, and not having met it. Now, not having had it received because of the manipulation, the games that were going on. And so to some degree, she was talking about the social role. She was playing the role of sweet young thing who was trying to, woo some guy or find out. She had her own ulterior motives, you see. And the guy had his ulterior motives, and therefore, the two shall never meet. They were manipulating one another. Manipulation is one of the ways we can avoid intimacy. There are controllers around who are fearful of getting close to somebody for fear, if I give myself away, you'll be able to hurt me. If I let go, I'll fall off the edge of the cliff. If I really get involved with you, it's like quicksand. I may just suffocate in there. So what do? I have to always be in control. And there are all kinds of controlling mechanisms. And one of them is to just be a wooer, you see, and try to keep things under control that way so that nobody can hurt me. Well, of course, then I don't give myself away. I'm not honest with you, etc. We broke through all of that social role thing because I wasn't out to bed her. I was married. I was not interested in, she was much too young for me. She'd want babies, and I already had 8 of those. And things like that. And 2, we broke through the cliches because I asked a real question, a genuine question. We weren't fooling around on this one, see? And there was a life at stake. And what happened was we cracked through this barrier, which Fritz Perls had called the death layer, because it's that layer in which the energy is all used to close in, and it's like a shell around the real me. And when we cracked through that, what she's talking about, that freedom and joy she was feeling, was she had been brought out of her shell. She had been able to confront what was going on with her, and somebody actually affirmed her. Said, you're worth my time. See, when we talk about self-esteem as a basis for good intimate relationships, we always have to understand that comes back to the same thing. In order for me to feel that you can really be interested in me, I have to feel I'm worth your while. In other words, I have to feel worthwhile. What's a while? While is a little bit of time. And if I don't get people who are the giants in my world to give me a while here and a while there, then I never feel worth anybody's while. So I used to feel like I'm only worthy of the crumbs, and if somebody comes along and actually gives me a big chunk of while, I wonder what they're up to, how they're trying to manipulate me. See, you still with me? Yeah. So when I give you some time, see, I'm saying you're worth my while. And if I give you a lot of time, you're very worthwhile. See? And if we keep this up, we'll be an item. But at any rate, we cracked through that basically through the gift of time, through the gift of a sense of she was worthwhile, and therefore she could level with me. The manipulative character of her past dealings will come clear as we go on. Okay. We have notes. Oh, yeah. I have a note on the lone cowboy I'd like to share with you. I pointed out he very often fears real close contact and sees intimacy as a threat to his personal autonomy. And there are lone cowboys who are cowgirls, They're in the same boat. So that if they let a man or woman move in with them, they soon feel crowded and want out of the relationship. They like to keep it at a certain distance, you see. Some lone cowboys or cowgirls are so fearful of losing their autonomy or becoming dependent that as soon as their relationship reaches a stage where they really feel they really like having this person around, this is really a wonderful relationship, I better get out of it fast. Why? Because I'm becoming dependent on you. And if I do that, if I'm a male, particularly in a society that says males all have to be autonomous, the Virginian, the lone rider into the sunset, kisses his horse goodbye and rides off, or whatever, says goodbye to the lady and kisses his horse and rides off, or whatever. The old Gary Cooper movies. Yeah, that autonomy thing is very strong. I don't need anybody, and I'm now feeling too dependent on you, so I'll leave. And it bewilders a lot of women, because men are more prone to do this than women. Bewilders a lot of women that just when the relationship seemed to be going so well, the guy shut it down and said goodbye. Now, some guys, and not too long ago I had a young man who had reached age 36 and had done that on such a consistent basis that he finally decided something was wrong with him. He was right. You know, and so we dealt with that, but he could grow through it because he became aware of the fact that he was, every time he got into a relationship, and the moment it really began to feel good, the moment he really began to feel terribly positive about this person, he would back off and start over with another one. See? In other words, the flight from intimacy would occur right at the moment he was most happy with the relationship. Leaves other people rather stunned. They become victims, if you will, unwilling victims of a situation that leaves them totally bewildered, see. It would be useful for those women to discover earlier on that the person has that sort of pattern. There are some people who are very conscious of that, by the way, in their own lives. The man of affairs, for example. The man of affairs is a person who he has certain cliches. The cliche level of personality is that level in which we go through certain routines. And to the degree that we allow cliches to enter our life, to that degree we've stifled real spontaneity, real openness with one another. Everything's a routine. See, a lot of people, their lovemaking in their marriages is not lovemaking, it's a routine, it's a cliche. They could videotape it once, they'd never have to do it again. Because it puts no new energy in the relationship. There's no intimacy occurring. There's no new self-revelation or self-disclosure occurring. It's just a routine. By the way, routine is another word for rut. You dig a rut 6 feet deep and you've got a thing called a grave. So cliches are deadly, okay? Now, that level, but we all go through cliche life. We always have parts of our life that are cliches. How are you today? Fine, you know, and the stewardess on the airplane, we always go through these cliche relationships. But the social role thing is the other thing. That's where we play certain roles. I've been through this once before in another context. I'm not going to spend much time on it. But the social role layer is where even if husband-wife is a social role, and if I only play it as social role, you never get to know me. I'm trying to be good husband and you're trying to be good wife. We only meet on a game-playing level, a role-playing level. Well, the same thing goes with the man of affairs or the woman of affairs. What happens? They know that in scene 1, act 1, they do certain things, and this will win fair man or fair lady for scene 2 of act 1. And then there's scene 3 of act 1, and it runs just like a well-ordered play. Then you run down the curtain on that, and now we moved on to a new level of understanding and relationship, and then we do act 2. Scene 1, 2, 3, and then we run down the curtain. Then we do act 3. And it's really smooth. It's wonderfully well done. There's only one problem. After scene 3 of act 3, the curtain comes down, the person breaks off the relationship, gets another person, and goes through exactly the same routine. They go to the same restaurants, they go to the same dates, they do the same romantic things, they do all the same things. Hope you understand what I'm saying here. In other words, there's no intimacy occurring in that kind of relationship. The person is running a scam. They're running a routine. They may not even be that much aware of it. But what's happening is they know that script, and they know how to handle that script. They feel safe with that script, so they run this play again and again. They just change the other leading person, man or woman, depends on who's the main actor in this. And doing so, they have a lot of relationships that it could be with the same person over and over again because the other people are interchangeable. Hope you understand what I'm saying. This is deadly to intimacy, and there are people out there who do it because they're afraid if they don't know what to do after Act 3, Scene 3. They'd have to ad-lib, and they don't have a script for that, and that's terrifying. They're afraid that they'll be lost. They're afraid that they'll lose their identity somehow. They're afraid of being swamped. Or they're fearful, if I give myself away, you'll drop me. I'll be abandoned then, so I'll abandon you first. Some of the people who fear abandonment abandon other people quickly. I mean, they'll get involved, and then they'll say, this is getting too intense, you'll drop me, and I'll hurt like I did when Mommy dropped me, so I'm going to abandon you first. I'll get the first one in, you see? And they run that script. If we become aware of that, we come back again always to this whole thing of fear of invasion, fear of abandonment being two of the major things that war against are allowing ourselves to give ourselves away, or are allowing ourselves to really be there for another. Because if I really am there for you, you'll respond to that, and then what happens? We're involved. Now what do I do with it? See? And if I have that fear that is clouded over the love, if I don't have enough love for me or love for you to go through the fear, see, to drive out the fear, then I'll keep playing those games. And those are the major barriers to intimacy in our time, I think, among others. Okay. There are other barriers to intimacy. One is that there was a child-rearing practice and a spirituality when I was a kid that said you must not spoil a child. You must not praise this child. You only look, it's like teachers who 93%, I think it is, the NEA once pointed out, 93% of the marks on a kid's paper are for the mistakes made. 93% of teachers say they only mark papers for the errors. And we got that at home, too. The only time we got paid attention to very often was when we did something wrong. So we were constantly put down. It was always, nobody ever noticed what we did right. That was expected of us. But what we did wrong, got a big red circle around it, you see. So we learned that we were going to be loved on our performance. We would be approved of if we performed well. Well, that's a buried intimacy. If I have that performance mentality, then you say, I love you. I figure you don't love me. You love what I do for you. Or you love me when I behave in a certain way. Or you see what I mean? That then, too, becomes a rejection of letting you into me. I'm going to come back to this before we're through. This is a very important thing. And so I feel I play the social role of good performer. I'll carry that everywhere. If I carry it into sex, I will be a non-orgasmic male or female, but I'll be performing very well. Oh, before we're through, we're going to talk about non-orgasmic males. You didn't even know they existed. And, yeah, there are more of those around than there are non-orgasmic females. Yeah. They just disguise it better. Because they at least ejaculate, see, and people think that means something. They may as well be spitting. Okay. And one of the major ways people short-circuit their intimate pleasure in sex is by being good performer. It's also a way in which people reject the love of others because they feel, yeah, you love me because I did this or that for you, and but you wouldn't really love me if you got inside and knew me as I really am. So I'm still playing a role of good performer here in my social relationship with you. That's a buried intimacy if I really feel you can't accept me that way. So what do? If I'm a good performer, I try to avoid confrontation with you. I try to avoid bringing up anything that might disturb the relationship for fear you'll mark me down for that. I don't bring up anything that's bothering me or I resent or any anger. I stuff that. Why? Because I'm supposed to be a good performer. See, and I know that you'll like me as long as I'm nice or as long as I behave properly or as long as, so you never, what's happening, I'm putting up a barrier to your getting to know me. Okay, I hope all of this is pretty clear so far. You do recognize these people I'm talking about? Yeah. Because all of us play some of these games to some degree or have played them to some degree. Okay. This is why, for instance, the good performer, for example, I meet a lot of these in therapy. They've read every self-help book you can name. First thing I have to do is tell them, stop reading. I mean it. They read these books, and they've dressed for success, and they've gone for it, and they've said, I'm okay, you're okay, and they've done this, and they do all the right things. You see what I mean? They do the right things. They've read the books, and they do the right things. You're coming back to doing. But what are they doing? They're playing a social role that they got from some of the books. You see? But they haven't gotten in touch with themselves and expressed themselves. They're trying to do things by a script written by other people in the self-help books, rather than just saying, who am I? Who are you? What are we doing here? What do we want to do here? We're going to have a thing going, or, do we want to get, that sort of thing. So if I continue to let other people write the script, I can be a good performer in that category too. And that's a barrier to intimacy, because you meet me in my performance rather than meeting me. See, I hope you understand that one too. There's also the person who withdraws in self-defense out of this protective instinct, whether it's the protective instinct of fear of invasion, or I don't want to get overcommitted here, I don't want my life swamped by you, and I can withdraw in a number of ways. I can withdraw to the TV set. Many married couples withdraw to the TV set. See, the man, the single largest, most effective birth control device is the television set. and when coupled with a recliner, it's absolutely foolproof. And many people withdraw to the recliner in front of the TV set so that they don't have to interact with other people. In 63% of homes in the United States, the television set is on during dinner. And I'm less concerned with what's coming through the tube than I am with what's not going on at the dinner table when it's on. And what's not going on is any intimate communion. At the communion table of the family, nobody's dialoguing. They're all looking at a tube, or that's overriding any possibility. That noise is overriding any possibility of our really communicating with one another and getting closer. And that's exactly why it's on. There are people who have it on during lovemaking. That'll keep us from saying anything important. Ooh, look at that. You see? Yeah. Some people recognize that, don't they? Yeah, you'd be surprised what goes on. The complaints we get. There's also the person who fears a loss of control. And I have, before we conclude this session, I just want to mention this one. You see, if I have had early experiences, for example, I had a man in the medical profession who was a very highly skilled specialist. He came in because he had just recently had somebody crack through his shell through an affair, you see, and he thought he had intimacy now, and he announced that he had never loved his wife. Never loved her. Didn't like his wife at all. Why had he married her? Well, they had gone together for a while, before, in college and so on. It just seemed like the thing to do. On the other hand, when I asked him about his family background, well, he had never known his father, and he was an only son, and he doted on his mother, and he visited her every week. Okay? And he saw her, and he phoned her once a day, and he visited her every week. She had seen him through medical school. She had bought his practice. She had done this and that, and he just loved her. He was a devoted son, right? Yeah. I invited him in for a private session, and I said, if you're operating on my brain, I want you to be an automaton. I really do want you to be mechanically perfect. But I'll tell you something. The other day, whether you were talking about your mistress, about your children, about your wife, about your work, or about your mother, you sounded like a robot. And I said, what made you decide that if you went out of control, you'd do terrible damage? And he said, I guess I was about 6 years old. And my mother gave me a carpenter set with a screwdriver in it, and I wanted to kill her. And so I put the screwdriver in the garbage. And ever since then, I have, been aware of the fact that I really, and it came out. He didn't like his mother at all. She had suffocated him through all his early years with, if you love me, you would do this. If you love me, you would do that. If you love me, you would do this. If you love me, you would do that. So he loved his mother, right? Yeah, And the resentment he felt against her was so profound that he couldn't love anybody else. On the surface, you see, it's unpatriotic not to love your mother. She can be a monster, but it's un-American not to love her, okay? And so it goes against the grain. So he contended he loved her, but what he was doing was, in seeking to keep his feelings under control, then they came out, it was okay not to love his wife. I said, well, you see, what really happens is you don't like your mother at all. She did bad things to you. She invaded you, and what you have to do is put that in perspective and start spending time with your wife and get to know her before you dynamite a perfectly good family in order to make a marriage out of an affair and ruin your wonderful affair. Okay, that's only partly facetious, The moment you turn an affair into a marriage, there goes the affair. Okay, we're going to take a break now, and we'll come back in a few minutes. Thank you very much.